Hey guys, this is Roy from Tallneck Tech. Before we start the video, there's a sale going on my website, tallnecktech.com. Use code SPRINGSAVINGS to get $100 off any PC. I recently built a PC in the Fractal Terra that features the 14700K and the RTX 4070. So check it out. Hey guys, it's Roy from Tallneck Tech. Here again with the builds of the month. I recommended a couple of builds to you guys. I had some builds up on my Buy Me a Coffee. This month I have a couple modifications to those builds, as well as a new build to add to the lineup using the new AMD graphics card, the 9070 XT. And I'm gonna spend some time talking about each build, talk about what I think makes sense at each price point, and then offer up what I would build given those budget constraints. So let's go ahead and look at some of these builds. Intel just released their own graphics card, the second generation of the ARC GPUs. It's called the ARC B580. There is a B570 that's a little less powerful, but for what it costs, you're probably better off just getting maybe like a used 2070 or something. So I don't know if anyone necessarily needs a B570, even though it's a cool card, but the B580 is kind of the sweet spot. This is the build I have listed for the Intel B580 at the moment, and it's the build that's up on my site. I'm using a Ryzen 5 7600X. So the 7600X is a 6-core processor. This is probably the best CPU to use with the B580. It's super cost effective. You can get it for about $200 right now if you shop around, which is pretty good. With the 6-core Ryzen 5 CPU, you'll get full use out of the B580, right? You won't have to worry about the CPU throttling the graphics card or anything like that. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this case. So if you were doing a pure budget build, you don't have to go with this case. You don't have to go with this cooler. You could use the build that I had last month for the B580. But I love this case. This is a new case by Thermaltake. It's called a TR100 Mini ITX. And what's cool about it is that it's an ITX case, but it has space for massive graphics cards, right? And then on top of that, it also has space for up to a 240 millimeter radiator, which is wild. You know, there aren't many cases like that. You can see in some of the case photos that there's a 240 millimeter rad, which is more than enough to cool the 7600X. Is honestly probably more than enough to cool even the 7900 probably, or the 7700. But it's a cool case. There is a screen that you can buy for it, although I think the screen is kind of expensive at the moment, something like $90 to $100, and good luck finding it in the color that you want it because they're all sold out. So the case looks pretty cool, and I just like this build. I think that at around $1,300 it's a solid build. Now if you want to go back and check the pure efficiency ARC B580 build, let me pull that up for you guys from last month. So this was my B580 build from last month. You'll notice that it's quite a bit cheaper. The main reason it's cheaper is because we're going with what I still believe to be the price to performance champ, the 12600KF. This thing is just unbeatable. I mean, it's a 10-core processor for $124, right? That's a little over $12 per core. That's chef's kiss, right? And then the Thermalright Phantom Spirit. I sing the praises of the Phantom Spirit and the Peerless Assassin all day long. I will recommend these coolers till the cows come home. An MSI motherboard, pretty solid for this CPU. Some Corsair Vengeance memory, and then the same ARC B580 video card. I think the only difference is that because this is a larger case, the Montech Air case is a little bit cheaper, right? ITX cases tend to come at a premium because they're more compact, there's more moving parts. They usually come with a riser cable so you can attach the graphics card to the other side. And we can get an ATX form factor power supply. So if you're just in the market for a super cheap build, this is super affordable, probably will last you a long time. At 980 bucks, you really can't beat it. Next up on the list, we have the build for the Radeon RX 9070 XT. The reason I have a build for the 9070 XT and not the 9070 is that the XT is really the premier card, right? The 9070, for the most part, just exists to upsell you to the 9070 XT, and truthfully, I think the 9070 XT is the better value. I mean, you can get a 9070 for maybe somewhere in the ballpark of $550 to $600, but none of these cards are really going for MSRP at the moment. Even looking at this listing now, the 9070 XT costs $940. So just so you guys know, I picked up a 5070 Ti overclocked for $940, and the 5070 Ti non-overclocked edition MSRP is $750. So the price difference between the MSRP 5070 Ti and the 5070 Ti overclocked is $190, right? So similar to what's going on with AMD guys, and this is happening for both AMD and Nvidia, they're using those lower priced models to trick people into thinking that the cards are cheap and then upselling you to the more expensive card, because so long as they produce these cheaper cards in smaller quantities, you can't really get your hands on one. And that's what I'm seeing in stores. I can't find 5070 Ti's that aren't overclocked. I can't find 9070 XTs that are going for MSRP. They don't exist. If you can find them, you won the lottery, because they're nowhere to be found. But a little bit about this build. I went with a 9700X. Again, this has a 240 millimeter rad. Pretty standard stuff. 48 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM. This is a little bit faster than the RAM for the ARC B580. But other than that, you know, fairly standard PC build, 2 terabytes of NVMe storage. I liked this case. I am a pretty big fan of Thermaltake's recent cases. I think they're just doing fun stuff. What was cool about this case to me is that it's a full metal enclosure, which means you really don't want to have a mounted push-pull configuration where you're pulling air that's supposed to be coming from the front of the case if you have a case that has just a metal sheet in front, right? When you have stuff like this, you want air rising from the bottom of the case out through the top, like with a 240 millimeter rad. So for this setup, I did go with the Thermalright Frozen Knot. I think this is the same one I used in the ARC B580 build also. It's just a cool AIO. It has the little infinity mirror thing that a lot of companies are doing now. Lee has some coolers that use an infinity mirror also. It's cool. You know, it looks cool on a build. It's not cheesy the way that I think some things are cheesy. To me, the infinity mirror looks better than a screen or something, because what you'll see some people do is they buy those AIOs that have a screen over them, and then they play clips from Dragon Ball or Nyan Cat running over a rainbow, which there's a place for that, but I tend to prefer minimalistic looking builds. And something about this case really spoke to me. I just think Thermaltake totally nailed it. It's very sleek looking. For a micro ATX case, it's pretty spacious. So this was my build for the 9070 XT. And I recommend the Sapphire 9070 XT because Sapphire historically has put together very reliable cards. Even though they're priced a little bit higher than some of their competitors, I would pick the Sapphire card over someone else. I would say for all of the board partners of Radeon and AMD who make their graphics cards, my top two have always been Sapphire and then XFX. Very, very cool company. They make awesome cards, and they recently introduced a new type of card where you can 3D print or change out the accents of the cards depending on your build, which I love. I love this kind of stuff. I know it's simple, but you have no idea as somebody who builds PCs how hard it is to find parts that match with what you're building. And even just that little accent, these are the parts that come off, makes such a big difference. So look for those two cards if you're going to buy a 9070 XT. Any of them are going to be great. Asus makes super reliable cards, but XFX and Sapphire have been so ahead of the game for so long. I think they still have a leg up just in terms of aesthetics and quality of their cards. We're on to the last build of the month. This is the build for the RTX 5080. So I want to tell you guys why I don't have a build listed for the 5070 and the 5070 Ti. It's not because they're not good cards, it's because they're impossible to find. Okay, so if you go to Micro Center right now, you go to Amazon, Best Buy, B&H, any website that sells PC parts, you can't buy a 5070 or a 5070 Ti or a 5080 or a 5090. You just can't buy them. So if you're buying these cards, you're either showing up the day they get restocked, which I've been doing because I'm trying to get a hold of some cards for a couple people, or you're buying them at scalper prices, which I can never really recommend. So the only case where I can say build a PC with a 5080 is if you're okay paying scalper prices, which some people are, and that's just reality. If it wasn't, people wouldn't be paying those prices. But if you're one of those people, you really need to upgrade. I would say this is the PC I'd build with a 5080. So I'll talk a little bit about the parts, what they mean, and why I went with those parts. So I have the 9800X3D. This is still probably the best CPU at the moment for a bunch of reasons. The 9800X3D is so solid in its performance at almost everything. Recently, the 9950X3D released, which is two 8-core chiplets with 3D V cache, and it's going to be impossible to find for a while. The next best thing you can do is just get a 9800X3D. And the rest of this, still pretty stock standard. This build I have listed is all white. So if you want an all white PC, these are the parts you can use. The Gigabyte X870 Aorus Elite Wi-Fi. It's a good board. I still recommend people avoid ASRock motherboards if they're using the 9800X3D because they've just been blowing up on people. They've been exploding in the sockets. ASRock hasn't made a statement. They've released some BIOS updates, but it just keeps happening. So I can't recommend it to people. I just can't. Not when the CPUs are blowing up in their sockets. And other than that, This sort of thing happened last generation with Asus boards, where the 7800X3D was blowing up in Asus motherboards. And if you don't know, Asus and ASRock are owned by the same company. It's just that when ASRock started, they were the budget brand and Asus was the premium high-end brand. But the thing that always happens, and this happens with guitars too, and sometimes with cars, the budget brand starts to catch up and it's harder to differentiate between the two. So we had this problem with Asus boards last generation. It has a lot to do with very tight voltage control that goes to the SoC and the voltage regulators for the CPU, and how the BIOS deals with those voltages, because always what tends to happen if you look at the bottom of these dies is that right underneath where the V-cache sits, there will be like a dark spot or something, which just means there was too much voltage going to those spots. And truthfully, I don't even know if BIOS can fix it. I think, you know, if you're gonna buy these CPUs, you have to be ready to do some undervolting and some underclocking, because that's just what it takes. Maybe I'll do a video about that sometime soon. But this is my recommended build. I listed the Arrow because it's just a cool looking card. If you're gonna get a white 4080, this is my favorite looking one. It's not the best 5080, sorry. But if you can get your hands on any of them at the moment at MSRP, that is the best 5080, because none of them are at MSRP. And even at MSRP, are they worth it? Tough to say. But it's even harder for me to recommend the 5090 at the moment, because if you watch my last video, the 5090 is made to explode. It's running at the thermal limit of what the 12 volt high power rail can carry, and it is not gonna last. So this is the highest end build that I can responsibly recommend. Again, if you didn't see my builds from last month and you want to build something with a 5090, I do have a build involving the 5090 in my February list. It's right here. But again, I can't recommend building this, at least not at the moment, because the 5090 is just an unpredictable card. I mean, if you're paying $3,359.99 for a video card that's gonna explode, nah, that's stupid. I can't recommend that to anyone, which is a shame, because there's no video card at the moment that's affordable that has more than 16 gigabytes of VRAM. And I feel like this generation is really nickel and diming people with the VRAM. Last generation we had more options. There was the 7900 XT and the XTX, which I think had 20 gigabytes and 24 gigabytes respectively, but this generation it's a little wonky, it's rough, and it's good to stay informed about what makes sense at each price point. So those are the builds for this month. And with that, I am going to wrap this one up. Thank you so much for watching today's video, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe. And if any of these builds helped you, please consider donating a couple dollars over at my Buy Me a Coffee. If you'd like me to build any of these computers for you, every single computer I listed is available over at my website, tallnecktech.com. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.